Lakota chief was shunned after the battle he lost. A scarred widow stood beside him and wed him. The pipe was cold. I don't know why that's the first thing I come back to. Not the screaming. Not the horses going down in the dark. Not Hoka Wasteface when I told him his son wasn't coming home. The pipe was cold. I was sitting outside my teepee the morning after we returned, and I picked it up to fill it. And the bowl was cold as river stone in February, and I sat there with it in my hands for a long time. Just sat there. That was the beginning of it, I think. The pipe going cold. My name is Dakota Mato. They gave me that name when I was 8 and brought down a black bear on the creek above our summer camp. Bear befriends people. My grandfather wrapped my shoulders himself and said I would be the kind of man others came toward when things turned hard. I believed him for me. I stopped believing him after the Willow Creek fight. I won't tell the whole of it. There are men who talk about their defeats the way they talk about weather. This much rain fell. This many horses were lost, as if it happened to someone else. That's not how it sits in me. What I'll tell you is this. I led 47 men out, and I brought back 31, 16 families, 16 women who did the work of sitting down in the dirt to begin again. I made the calls that day. I read the ground wrong, put us where the rifles could find us, and there was no hill to fall back to. And by the time I saw it, the sun was already going down, and the shootings was already starting. 31 men came home. I was one of them, which is its own kind of weight. When we rode back into camp, there was no sound that I can describe to you. There is the sound of a camp that has suffered. The crying, the keening, the women already knowing before you tell them, because the number of horses tells the number of men. I had heard that sound before, but I had never ridden back into it as the reason for it. That's a different thing entirely. The council met 3 days later. I sat in my place, and I spoke plainly. I told them what I decided and why and where I was wrong. I was not a man who asked for softness. I asked them to judge the decision, not the man who made it, which I understand now was a kind of pride I hadn't finished with yet. Thinking those two things could be kept separate. Dakota Sunka, my second, spoke for a long time. He was careful. He is always careful, which is why I trusted him at my back for a decade. He said, the people needed a chief who could read the land in the dark as well as the light. Strut. He said the families of the 6th needed to know it wouldn't happen again. He said some words about my years of service, and my father's name, and my grandfather's name, which is how you honor a man while you remove him. I sat still the whole time. I had told myself I would sit still, and I did. Walking Hawk took leadership of the band by nightfall. He was younger, faster with decisions, more certain of himself in the way that young men are certain before enough things have gone wrong. I did not think he was a bad choice. I thought in the days after that the people needed certainty more than they needed me, and Walking Hawk had that quality then, the certainty the way a new knife is certain. I moved my tippy to the edge of camp, not far, just far enough. There is a place where the cottonwoods thin out before the creek bend, and the ground is level there, and the wind hits straight, and I put my tippy there. And in the mornings I could hear the camp come awake without being inside it. I could hear the children, could hear the horses stamping and the women starting fires. I just went part of the thing I was hearing. The men I had led still came to me sometimes, not often. They had their own lives, their own families, their new chief to follow. Hoka Waste came nearly every week. He was 62 years old, and his son Chasky had been the youngest man in the column, 19, good with horses. Funny in the way that young men are funny when they know they're liked. Hoka Waste would sit with me and we'd talk about other things. The old winter, the condition of the elk herds, a story about a man we'd both known 40 years ago. He never mentioned Chasky. He never mentioned Willow Creek. He just sat. I didn't understand it then. I understand it now. He was showing me that I still existed to someone, that I was still a man that a decent man would sit with. The loneliness surprised me. I had spent time alone before. Years on the trail, seasons out scouting, a winter Once, trapped above the timberline with my horse and my thoughts and not much. But this was different. This was being alone, inside the sound of your own people, inside the smoke of fires you knew and the language you'd spoken all your life. That loneliness has a particular weight to it. It's like hunger in that way. Ordinary hunger is nothing. You've been hungry. Every man's been hungry. But the hunger you feel when you can smell bread and cannot go inside, that's something else. I spent the first weeks working, repairing things. My teepee poles needed replacing on the east side, and I cut new ones and shaped them and got them right. I repaired 2 saddles that had been neglected. I rebuilt my bow with better sinew. Work was the only thing that had a beginning and an end, and I needed things that had beginnings and ends. I wasn't sleeping well. I'd wake in the dark and the quiet, and my mind would go back, and I'd have to get up and do something with my hands. It was during that time that I first noticed the woman at the creek. She came at odd hours. Most women came to the creek in the morning, early, the same as always, the same rhythms the camp had always kept. This woman came at midday sometimes, or late afternoon, and she worked quickly, and went back quickly, and she didn't linger the way some did to talk. I noticed her because she passed within sight of my tippy to get to the water, and there are only so many things you watch when you've reduced your life to a small radius. I knew who she was in the way you know people in a band of this size, by name and family connection, but not well. Winona Maza. Iron Winona, some called her, which was meant to be a description, not a compliment. She had been married to a man named Stands Alone for 6 years. Then he died of fever 2 winters back, and she had managed without him, in a manner the camp found either admirable or unsettling, depending on who you talked to. She had no children. She had a small teepee of her own, and a horse she kept in better condition than most men kept theirs. And she did her work and asked for nothing. The scar ran from her left eyebrow, down across her cheekbone toward her jaw. I had seen it before. Most people in the camp had seen it. The way you've seen a thing so long it stops registering. I learned later. It came from a raiding party when she was 14, when her family's camp was struck, before anyone was awake. She had taken a knife in the dark, trying to reach her younger sister. The sister got away. Winona got the scar. She was matter-of-fact about it when she finally told me. It happened, she said. Things happen. The scar is what I have to show for the sister being alive. She didn't speak to me the first weeks she passed by. Neither did I speak to her. That was ordinary enough. There were protocols, even out here at the edge of camp, where protocols had loosened some. She spoke to me first, midday in early fall. The air gone crisp at the edges, the cottonwood leaves just starting to yellow. She stopped and looked at me. I was mending a bridle on a rock, and she said, "You're the one they say reads tracks." I said yes. She said, "I've been finding tracks near my tippy that I can't make out. Something heavy. Could be a man's boot, could be a big dog. I'd like to know which." I set the bridle down and went with her and looked at the ground, and it took about a minute to see they were bear tracks. A young male, probably just curious about the smell of food, not dangerous unless you cornered him. I told her so. She said, "Thank you," and she went inside. The next week she stopped again. She had a knife that needed resharpening, and she'd seen my tools and asked, could I do it? I could. I sharpened the knife. She said thank you again. The week after that she brought dried meat and set it on the rock beside my fire without saying anything and went back to her teepee. I ate it and said nothing to anyone. This is how things started between us. Transactions, practical things. She needed her horses right, foreleg looked at, and I knew how. I needed my winter supply of wood cut and stacked, and she appeared the following day with her axe. We didn't talk much during these exchanges. We didn't not talk either. We were 2 people doing things near each other, which is its own kind of conversation. I'll tell you what I saw when I saw her. I saw a woman who had been alone long enough that she'd made peace with it, the way a creek makes peace with its banks. Not unhappy exactly, just shaped around the fact of the solitude. I recognized it because I was in the process of doing the same thing myself, carving my life smaller to fit what I had left of it. When you see that quality in another person, you feel it like recognizing a word in a language you're still learning. You know it before you know how to say it. She started sitting with me in the evenings, sometimes. Not every evening. Not predictably. She'd come with a piece of work, beadwork, or she was mending something, and she'd sit near my fire and work, and we'd talk or not talk. She didn't treat me differently than she treated anyone. That sounds like a small thing. It wasn't. Everyone else in the camp had a way of behaving around me that was either too careful or too cold. Either they were tiptoeing around Willow Creek, or they were making sure I knew I was no longer the person I had been. Winona didn't do either of those things. She talked to me the way you talk to a man. She disagreed with me when she disagreed. She laughed at things that were funny. She didn't look at me with that quality people had, that I'd come to hate. Careful. Nothing. Look, that means they're working to feel nothing when they see you. The first time she mentioned Willow Creek was about 2 months after we started sitting together. She didn't bring it up like it was a weight she was setting down. She just asked me what the ground looked like that day. The actual ground. Topography. I told her. She asked why I'd chosen the approach from the west and not the north. I told her. She said, "My husband would have made the same call. There wasn't a better option. The north approach puts you against the ridge." She said it plainly. Then she went back to her beadwork. I didn't say anything for a while. Then I said, "Most people think there was a better option." She said, "Most people weren't there." I'm not a man who cries easily. I hadn't cried after Willow Creek, not from grief exactly, more from a kind of shutdown. The way a fire figure goes out, not because someone put it out, but because it runs out of fuel. But something loosened in me when she said that. Most people weren't there. Such a small statement. I turned toward the creek and looked at it for a while. The winter came. Not the worst winter I'd seen, but old enough and long. Winona had managed her supplies better than I expected. She had dried meat enough and preserved enough, and she kept her horse healthy through the cold stretches. I had enough too. We checked on each other. This was just practical. 2 people at the edge of camp seeing that the other was managing. But it was also more than practical. You know the difference when you're in it. There were nights when the cold went deep, and the camp went quiet, and I'd see the glow or fire from where I lay, and it changed something about the dark. That's the only way I know to say it. The dark was different when I could see that glow. Not fixed, not solved, just different. One evening in the dead of winter, she came to my fire, and she didn't bring any work. She sat down, and she looked at the fire for a while, and I looked at the fire, and then she said, "I want to tell you something." I waited, she said. When Stan's alone died, I was glad, and then I hated myself for being glad, and then I stopped hating myself, and it took about 3 years. She paused. He wasn't a cruel man. He was just absent. You can be present in a tipi and still be absent. I don't know if you know what I mean. I said I thought I knew what she meant, she said. After he died, I decided I was done with needing someone. I had my horse, and my work, and my tools, and that was enough, and I believed that. I still mostly believe it. She looked at the fire, mostly. Then she was quiet for a long time, and I didn't fill the quiet, and after a while, she got up and said good night and went home. I lay awake a long time that night. The cold was settling into the ground around the teepee, that particular creek of frozen earth. And I was thinking about what she'd said, and more than that, I was thinking about what it meant that she'd said it to me. She wasn't a woman who said unnecessary things. In the months I'd known her, I'd learned that. If she said a thing, she meant it to land somewhere. Spring came the way it always comes, with mud first and then color. The creek ran high. The camp spirits lifted the way they always lift in spring. Something about the sun being available again. About the ground going soft. I was feeling it too. That slight lift. I had started to find a shape to my days that had its own dignity. Not the dignity I used to have. Leading men, being consulted. A different kind. Quieter. The kind that comes from a man being exactly what he is and not pretending to be more. Walking Hawk came to see me in late spring. He'd been chief through the winter without any serious trouble, and he was beginning to understand the work of it. Not just the decisions but the weight of the decisions, the fact that you carry the cost of them even when you're right. He sat down and we talked, and at the end he said, "I have been wanting your counsel on something, and I have been too proud to ask." I told him, pride was a quality that wore out fast in leadership. He said, "I know." We talked for 2 hours. I gave him what I had. I had made enough mistakes that what I had was worth something, and I gave it plainly without marking myself against him. When he left, he gripped my arm, and I gripped his, and something small but real shifted that day. Winona saw him leave. Later that evening, she came over, and she said, "That looked like it went well." I said it did, she said. "You helped him," I said. "He was willing to be helped," she said. "Most chiefs aren't. That's something about you, Lakota. You don't guard what you know." She looked at me in that direct way she had. No decoration, no looking aside. That's worth more than people here remember to value. I didn't know what to do with that. I'm not a man who handles compliments easily to begin with, and this one came with weight behind it. I looked at her and I said, "You've been kind to me this winter," she said. "I haven't been kind. I've been honest. Those are different things." It was the most I'd ever heard her say about herself, about what she thought she was doing, and I sat with it, and she sat across from me, and the fire was burning low. And I looked at this woman with the scar on her face and the careful way she lived and the horse she kept better than most men, and I thought, she came to the edge of camp for the same reason I did. Because the middle of things stopped fitting her, and she's been here all winter and she's still here. Not out of pity. Not out of anything she owes me, I said. "I'd like you to stay." She looked at me for a long time. Not surprised. I don't think she was the kind of woman who was often surprised by things. More like she was listening to something behind the words, checking it for what it was. She said, "You mean tonight," I said. "And after." She looked at the fire. She looked back at me. She said, "I have managed well on my own." I said, "I know." She said, "I'm not going to manage your tippy. I'm not going to be the thing that makes you feel better about what happened at Willow Creek. If I stay, it's because I'm choosing to stay, not because I owe you or you need saving," I said. "I know that too." She was quiet for a moment. "Then what is it you're asking for?" "I thought about it," I said. "Your company. What you think about things. The way you're honest with me." I paused. "The way you sit by my fire and don't treat me like a man who failed." She said, "You didn't fail. You made a decision with bad information and paid for it. Those are different things too." She said those words and they went into me the way water goes into dry ground. Quietly, without drama, just down and down. Nobody had said that to me directly. Not even Hoka Waste, who showed it in other ways but never said the words. She said them plainly, like a fact she'd known for a while and was tired of not saying. I held out my hand. She looked at it, she looked at me, and she put her hand in mine, and her grip was firm, the grip of a woman who used her hands every day, and she said, "All right, Dakota Mato. All right." We were married in the early summer. Hoka Waste stood with me. Her cousin, a woman called Bright Stone, stood with her. The ceremony was short. The people who attended were few. Not the whole camp, not the celebration of a young couple. But Walking Hawk came. Some of the men I'd led to Willow Creek and back came. They stood at the edge, and they watched, and they weren't looking at me with the careful, nothing look. They were just watching, the way you watch a thing that is real. There was a moment after, when the ceremony was done, and the small fire had been set, and we were standing side by side in the evening light, and someone said something. I don't even remember what, and Winona laughed. Not a polite laugh. A real one, sudden and unguarded, and she turned toward me. While she was still laughing, and she grabbed my arm, just grabbed it with both hands, pulling herself close. Not from falling. Not from fear, just from laughter and proximity and the feeling in a body when it lets something go. She stood there with her hands on my arm, and her head tilted back, and the scar catching the evening light. The way a scar catches light, the way it holds it differently from smooth skin, and she was shaking a little from the laughing. I looked down at her hands on my arm. I looked at her face. I want to tell that I had something grand happen inside me in that moment. I didn't. It was small. It was very small. Just a man looking at the hands of a good woman who had chosen to hold on to him, and feeling the weight of that hold, and knowing he was going to carry it right. That was enough. That was more than I'd expected out of what remained of my life. We stayed at the edge of camp through the summer. In the fall, we moved our tipi back. Not to the center. I wasn't the chief. I wasn't going to pretend at that. But back among the people. Walking Hawk came to ask my counsel more often now, and I gave it without ceremony, and he took it or didn't, and I didn't measure myself against whether he did. A few of the young men started sitting near my fire in the evenings, not because I invited them. Just because Winona and I were there, and the fire was there, and it was a place where things could be said plainly. I don't know if I became the man my grandfather meant when he named me. Bear befriends people. I spent a good portion of my life thinking it meant being powerful in a way others move toward. I think now it might mean something quieter than that. Being the kind of man a decent person doesn't leave. Hoka Waste brought dried venison in October. He set it down by our fire and stood there a minute. He looked at Winona, and he looked at me, and he said, "Good, that was all. Just good." He was an old man who had lost his son. He stood by my fire, and he looked at what my life had become. Woman sits beside me, this quieter shape of things. And he said, "Good," and I believed him. Winona handed him tea without being asked. He sat down. We sat with him until the fire burned low, and after he left, she put more wood on, and the flames took it, and I watched the sparks go up into the cold, clear October sky above the plains, above the camp, above everything I had lost, and everything I still had. And she put her hand on my knee and left it there without looking at me, the way you touch someone you've decided to touch for a long time. The pipe was warm now. It was sitting by my side, and when I reached for it, the bowl was warm from where it had been resting near the fire. That's the image I keep. That small warmth in my hand, the cold gone out of it at last.